It was difficult selecting a portion of this story, so I do encourage you guys to go on the website and check it out. After Eddie left, Douglas found himself alone for the first time since before his accident, terrified at the prospect. Challenges were one thing, he usually welcomed them as long as they were under his control. But this challenge wasn't his to control, at least not yet. Now he truly had to settle into life as a blind man. The first task, making a mental map of his living space to prevent damage to either himself or his environment, began with Eddie's help. Now using only his cane as a guide, he slowly walked from room to room, tapping the side and end of his device against different objects to get a feel for their location and sturdiness. He listened attentively to the sound resonating from each object as he hit it. The process was both exhausting and infuriating. Crash, bang. Though he walked slowly and methodically, there was no way to prevent accidents from happening while he learned the topography of his environment. Ceramic and glass shattered around him. Each mistaken movement brought a growl to his throat and a curse to his lips, something he'd done a great deal of while at the campus. He realized he'd have to be careful not to walk barefoot until he found some way to clean up the mess. At the campus, there'd been someone to clean up after these little accidents. Now, on his own, he'd have to consider hiring a housekeeper. The idea infuriated him. He'd always been an independent soul. Having someone in the apartment to clean up after him or help him in any way smacked of taking away some of that independence. Fortunately, he didn't have to make a decision right away. Douglas spent the weekend trying to implement a few of the techniques he'd been taught at the campus, and he'd asked a couple of his neighbors in the building for help. Several men rearranged his furniture until he felt he had safely negotiable paths. One kind woman spent an entire afternoon helping to label things in Braille. When it was all over, he felt secure and comfortable in his own home, but with Monday quickly approaching, he had to deal with his office. Both excited and fearful, he made plans to return to DataScan. When Douglas opened the door to Carl Lewison's office in the accounting department of DataScan, he immediately noticed something odd. The man didn't smoke, yet the distinct odor of tobacco wafted through the air. His eyes began to tear and burn. "Good to see you back, Douglas. Wish I could say the same." Yes. Douglas chuckled when he smelled the tangy, salty aroma of perspiration mingle into the tobacco cloud. The man never did have a sense of humor. "Anyway, it's good to be back. Getting shot and being hospitalized is not all it's cracked up to be." "I'm sure. Anyway, I know we talked a few times on the phone about you coming back to work, and we've missed you, but I've been doing a lot of thinking about your situation." Douglas thinks, uh-oh, here it comes. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck begin to rise as a boulder formed in the pit of his stomach. "Carl, I've been with DataScan a long time, and I'm anxious to get back to work. It's not my fault some freak accident has left me blinded." Douglas wasn't sure he liked where this conversation was leading. Despite his conversations with Carl while still at the campus, the man's assurances, he'd suspected that there would be a change in his work status. "Of course not. Relax, Douglas. No one is thinking of letting you go." "That's good to know. You had me worried for a moment." "Understandable, but there really is no need. In your absence, I took the issue upstairs and they agreed with me. You've been too valuable to the company to let go. We just needed to find a suitable place for you. I'm afraid it means I'm going to lose you, but I think we've come up with a great solution." "Oh, do tell." "You're always talking about ways to make the company more efficient, about new technology, doing all sorts of amazing things. In fact, if I didn't know better, I'd say you wanted to close down this department and let some machines take over our job." "I don't recall ever saying that sort, but what's this got to do with your conversation upstairs?" "Well, to answer that, let me introduce you to the gorilla in the room, so to speak. I was wondering when you started smoking, Carl." Douglas felt a strong hand take hold of his arm and then clasp his hand in a vice-like grip. "And I was wondering when you'd introduce me, though I don't think I'm much of a gorilla. Doug, I'm Sid Coltrane." The man's voice was high-pitched and squeaky. "I head up the IT department. I hear you're just a whiz with all things electronic. I'd like to come see what you to come see what we can do at IT." It was bad enough Douglas didn't seem to have a choice where he was going to work, at least not if he wanted to continue working at DataScan. The decision had been made for him. But he hated being called Doug, hated it since childhood, and he hated being around people who smoke. Now he seemed stuck with both, and to make matters worse, This man, who apparently would be his new boss, had a voice that hurt his sensitive ears. The next few weeks proved difficult. Aside from feeling like a child learning new tasks, Douglas had hoped to be able to get right back into his old life. He hadn't wanted to be seen as that blind man, with all the bigotry and sympathy, real or false, the label entailed. Unfortunately, his condition couldn't easily be hidden. The damned cane acted like a magnet for a host of comments and questions he didn't feel like dealing with. And even if he didn't have to use the hunk of wood, he now had to rely on others to help him with the most mundane of tasks. There had to be a way to rise above these challenges.